Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the lab. So we're going to start bridging a little bit more of a gap here today between maybe some training splits that you guys have been asking about. So think about your current routine, right? And maybe how you organize your training, or maybe even your treatment sessions for your patients. Are you doing a full body session? Are you sticking to maybe a push-pull split? Maybe something completely or entirely different. But today, what I want to start kind of looking into is different types of training splits. All right. So I want you guys to start thinking about how we can maybe bridge the gap between fitness, rehab, and performance today. A few different training splits, right? Full body session, a push-pull type of program, push-pull legs, upper and lower, or an old school bro split. I'm going to kind of go through a few different kinds, like I just labeled there, and we're going to kind of talk about how maybe each one could work, maybe where they fall short a little bit, and maybe where we decide what split might make more sense for your type of goals, schedule, and maybe even what you can recover with if you listen to the last episode. Um, but grab yourself a coffee, maybe grab your pre-workout, and let's break it all down. So before we start getting into the actual training splits themselves, um, you might be asking, if you've never done this before, what actually is a training split? Simply put, it's how you're dividing your workouts throughout the week, and it determines how often you're going to train each muscle group, maybe a pattern, or maybe even what energy system you're going to be wanting to train. And why does that matter? Because your training split actually can affect your recovery. It can basically affect your progressions, and then finally, ultimately, even your results. So if you're hitting the gym without a plan, probably not going to see a whole lot of progress, guys. And you're probably going to stall out. You're going to become disillusioned with the gym, and you're not going to want to be there. However, if you can find the right training split that aligns with your goals and also allows with what your schedule allows, and allows you to stay consistent, you can start reaching some of those goals and those desires you really want. So, for example, if you're training 3 days a week, or that's all you have time for is training 3 days a week, you're going to need a different approach than someone who's training 6 days a week. So if you're split and you can kind of think about what kind of framework you want to use, it's think of it as like a map that helps you to kind of guide where you want to get to with your goals. First part, then, we're going to kind of dive first into a full body split. So if we're going to start with a full body split, it's basically going to be training um, all major muscle groups in a single session. So think squats, bench press, pull-ups, maybe some accessory work, depending on where you really want to highlight some areas. But if you're really new to training, maybe this is going to be where you go with. This has been really popular with beginners, or anyone who's short on time and you don't have the ability to do like a lot of different training sessions in a week. But they're efficient because you're basically taking what you have in those 2 or 3 days in a week and you're able to train every single muscle group. So it allows you to hit them multiple times as well. So beneficials there. So why does it work? So number one, frequency. Like I already said, you can basically stimulate that muscle group at least 2 to 3 times in a week if that's all you got time for. And then also provides exposure to those muscle groups, which can help with building strength and also learning to coordinate the movements. So you're giving yourself more time for repetition, at least to the major muscle groups. It is a little bit more recovery friendly for number two. With the fewer sessions, you actually have more rest between sessions, unless you have to do one, two, three, and then you got 4 more days that you can now rest and recover for. And they're just simple. Number three, simplicity. So like you don't have to think about splitting up into different muscle groups. You hit everything, done, out of the gym. But aside from just some of the positives there, like some of the benefits, let's talk about maybe some of the challenges with a full body split. So sometimes a full body workout, if you're not regulating or watching your intensity, is they could feel pretty intense, right? So by the time you finished heavy squats and deadlifts, you might not have a whole lot of energy left for accessory work. And if you're more advanced, it can be a little tough to specialize. So like you can't necessarily always give some of those lagging muscle groups attention that maybe they really need to if you're cramming everything into one session. So it depends on how much time you have to train in those 3 sessions, or 2 to 3 sessions, I should say. So time can be the limiter, which is not always that great. So like when I was in PT school, I tried before I got into more into CrossFit training. I actually did a full body split, and I could only do it 3 days a week. It actually did help a lot with me maintaining a particular level of strength. I didn't get like crazy strong compared to what I'd done in the past, like being a rugby player and like training as a rugby player. I didn't feel like I developed as much strength or developed strength as quickly as I had in the past. Um, but also because I was working like I had class during the day, I would go to try to train. I feel like I was mentally just kind of cooked, and so going to go do a full body workout was kind of sometimes more taxing. Um, but I definitely needed more recovery on the side of things. I definitely wasn't sleeping enough. But then like I started transitioning actually more into like a push and a pull kind of split. So we'll kind of get into that here in a minute, but just kind of keep that in mind if you're going to be doing the full body training, making sure that you're hitting every single muscle group or the major muscle groups that you really need to. And if you can, try not to go too crazy on training if you're not getting enough recovery. But you should have enough recovery if you are only training 2 or 3 days a week, in theory. Like I said before, push and pull split. So if we're talking about this, you're going to basically be dividing your training into two different categories, push and pull, right? So for push days, you're doing a lot of pressing movements. So thinking about like your bench press, your overhead or strict press, and dips, just for a few examples. And then for pull days, thinking about like your deadlifts, your pull-ups, any kind of row, all pulls. Um, so one of the big things about this is that for most people, you need to start thinking about the sweet spot between focus and frequency. So like you can make this more specific to a particular movement pattern, where you can push heavier weights or you can do more volume without kind of burning out. Whereas before you were doing the full body, now you have more of the training split for the push and pull. So now you can put more emphasis to those singled out muscle groups for those particular movement patterns. Um, so why is this effective? One, balance. Push and pull helps with improving muscle imbalances between those two types of styles. You can customize it to tweak a little bit more towards the focus on those imbalances you might develop or might not be able to address in the full body splits. You can work more on particular attributes, including strength, hypertrophy, power production, if you wanted to do that as well. And you can also split out the push and pull type training to a 6 day a week program if you have the time for it. All right. But where it might fall short, if you're doing, pull-ups on a pull day and then bench press on a push day, your shoulders and your biceps are basically working on both days, right? So you want to start looking at your programming and being efficient with your programming so you can make that less susceptible to injury, right? Or reducing the risk of injury. And then the other thing is recovery wise. So if you're more of an advanced lifter and you've kind of got your schedule figured out, you know when you can push and you know when you maybe need to pull back a little bit, especially if you do have some of those overlap in those muscle groups. But being able to kind of put yourself in the situation for success and making sure you are recovering between those sessions. So like I absolutely loved the push and pull split when I first started it, but I definitely became more aware of like just how pitiful my shoulders were in regards to like my legs. So like when I was basically engaging my basically the overhead press and my dips. If I did dips and then I would have the overhead press, I don't know what it was, but like anything after that, my shoulders were just whipped. I couldn't do anything else with it. So I had to basically start adjusting my volume and then also I had to prioritize like maybe how I was programming it so that I would optimize my recovery in those muscle groups before I would try to train them again. So I started making like a little bit more insights into my own training, which do that for yourself as well, or talk with your coach about how you're feeling in regards to that. So then I got a little bit more nuanced with it and I started thinking about more of like a push pull and then legs, so like upper and lower splits. Um, so it's basically just a little bit of an extension of what we just talked about before, but now you're going to separate the legs aspect of that. So this required me to train about 6 days a week. I was able to get way more volume in for training, but I had to train much more. So to break this down more, so like my push days, now this is just examples. Um, I had my bench press, my dips, and then I also did like a cable push down. And then on like my pull days, I would utilize like my deadlifts, my pull-ups, and rows. But then my leg days focused more on squats, lunges, and then also like the hamstrings. So like if I'm going to be doing a push pull on legs, this is basically ideal for me as more of like I would say at the time I was probably more of like an intermediate or maybe an advanced lifter depending on how I looked at it. Um, Knowing what I know now, I probably would still say more of an intermediate. But I was able to commit to much more training during my clinical rotation, so I could split my training up much more. But now that I was training more, like much more, I didn't have as much time for recovery. So if I'm missing a day, right? Or if I missed a day because I just was like not great that day, or I was too busy with my clinical rotation and I missed that day, that kind of threw off my entire rotation. So it wasn't all that great. It really did allow for the ability for me to separate my arms and legs a little bit more, which was kind of nice. Because when you're training 4 to 5 times, it kind of allowed me to kind of see, wow, when I was doing just my push and pull, my legs could handle things much better than what my arms could. So like my ability to train my legs repeatedly in a week was so much better than my ability to repeatedly train my upper body in a week. So I started having to make that more of an emphasis of recovery between my upper body days so that I could benefit from that type of training, right? So these are all things that I've learned for myself, and so that's why I kind of wanted to bring this into light for you all. I've experimented with a lot of different training splits, and that's why I kind of want to bring some of the pros and cons to your awareness, and maybe you can start making some changes in your own programming. And then last but not least, the wonderful bro split. Um, where you basically are designating a day of training to each muscle group. So like chest day, back day, leg day, you know what I mean. Why is this popular? So this is actually a really big for like bodybuilders. Lets them really hammer each muscle with high volume, especially if your goal is like pure hypertrophy. This split does have its place. Now, here's the catch, right? So if you're just training each muscle group only once in a week, is that going to be optimal for most people? Sometimes, yes, right? Sometimes, though, you might need a little bit more recovery if you need to highlight some muscle groups more often for, like, let's say, growth, improving symmetry, you name it, etc. So if you're stimulating them again within 48 to 72 hours, sometimes that is a little hard for a newer lifter. But if I have someone who's more of an advanced lifter who has an idea of what the intensity and the volume is going to be like, that can help you with maximizing your gains for those muscle groups. So then the other thing we want to start taking into consideration is how do I know what split is best for me? So let's kind of break this down a little bit. So, number one, what is your training experience like? Are you a beginner? Are you advanced? Like, how do you go about kind of sorting that out? Well, looking at your training age, how well you feel with like overall movement patterns, that's something to take in consideration. So, if you're a brand new beginner, sometimes full body workouts or full body splits can be wonderful, and they're very simple because you're hitting all the major muscle groups. For advanced lifter, though, you might want to consider applying more volume and intensity to something like the push pull and legs, or maybe the push and pull aspect of things for a little bit more specialization and adding more volume to those groups. Depends on what your goal is, though, too. So, like, if your goal is hypertrophy, maybe you're looking for more of like the push pull legs so you can get more volume, or you want more time with that individualized muscle group. So then you can have the bro split, right? Or bro split. So the individualized muscle group, and then you can start adding in an additional type of exercise to the group of desire, right? Or where you need it based off what your coach sees. If you're definitely going to go with more of like a strength gain or strength improvements, I think the push pull leg or the push and pull definitely has its place. And then just for general fitness, if that's your goal, maybe stick with the full body splits. Me being a, rugby player, football, etc., I like to have more weightlifting involved with my conditioning. So I prefer like more of like the push pull um, and leg split. But then I've been incorporating a lot of different variety to my training now, so it's been a lot of fun. So these are just a few options, but not the epitome of all your options. So then also taking into consideration what's your time commitment. So like, can you train 2 to 3 days a week, or do you have 4 to 6 days a week that you can train? So if you only have 2 or 3 days a week and you really want to stimulate all the major muscle groups, full body is your game. If you're looking more along the lines of like 4 to 6 days a week, you can basically split out the volume over some view throughout the week. Um, push pull or push pull legs might be much more. But if you're doing that, make sure you take into consideration your recovery with those more days a week training. Because if you're struggling to recover, your progress won't be going very far either. So there's a few different things I want you to think about. I got a few questions for you. What is your goal with your training, right? How much time do you have for your training? And then what is your expected ability to recover or your expected time frame to recover between sessions? So I want you guys to just think about that. Because if you're just, that's just weightlifting. That's not even including any kind of form of conditioning as well. So if I wanted to combine my training with things like maybe you like to run, if I wanted to combine my training with something like running, I need to start thinking about maybe pairing a lighter running day with my leg days. Um, Instead of like doing my lower body exercise program and then going out there and trying to run a 5K. Like if you're an advanced, athlete and you've been doing that for a while, maybe you can handle that. I personally would not be of that that likeness. That's not me. So being insightful to what you reasonably can handle volume wise and start tracking it. See how much, I mean, there's a few different things. I'm actually going to go through another episode here, hopefully soon, about monitoring training intensity, training volume, and just a few little calculations you can even use to do that. So stay tuned for that. But, in the long run, look at what life allows. Sometimes life finds a way of making training not as much a priority, and we have to abide by that. And we need to respect that time. But then that means there's a way to modify and at least get in what you have time for with what life allows. So I hope that you guys will find what works for your goals, your scheduled recovery, but don't be afraid to experiment. There's no set in stone like absolute you need to follow. But I hope you guys enjoyed today's episode. Share it with a friend. If you want to tag us on Instagram at the Lab Collective, or if you want to tag my Instagram, Dr. Luke Vollenkamp, DPT, feel free for it. And let me know what your favorite training split is and why maybe it works for you. But until next time, guys, stay consistent, stay curious, and keep building. All right. I will see you guys in the next episode.